Yesterday was that day that nobody wanted to ever have to come, but everybody was waiting to come. That's right. Ray Holmberg, ladies and gentlemen, was sentenced yesterday. Now, a little background. For those of you who are saying, well, who's Ray Holmberg? Well, you might be new to the community. You might not follow the news. Ray Holmberg, longtime legislator, served from 1976 to just recently, basically resigned. Still could be serving the legislature right now. I think he was still in his term. But Ray Holmberg, chairman of appropriations, a Republican in the majority, incredibly powerful, and he took advantage of that. Traveled on behalf of being a legislator at the dime of the state in many cases, and traveled 2 different countries. Prague is one that's going to be mentioned a lot in our conversation today, with the intent and quite clearly the action of having sex with small boys. I mean, do I need to say that again? My guess is you're saying no, Joel. But the truth is he was convicted. I shouldn't say convicted. He pled guilty and yesterday was sentenced for that crime. The sentence was recommended to be 37 months by the U.S. Attorney's Office, by Jennifer Poole, who you're going to hear from a little bit later. We've got some sound from. But Judge Hovland said nope. He sentenced him to 10 years in jail. 10 years. Tyler Axness was one of the individuals that was in that courtroom all morning long. Ryan Janke from our news team was in there all day long. Gentlemen, were you surprised, Tyler, that it was 10 years?
That it was 10 years, yes. Was I surprised that Judge Hovland went above the signed plea agreement? No. There are some indications in visiting with some attorneys throughout the course of just waiting, and there was a long wait period to get to the sentencing date because they had 36,000 documents to go through. But the indications were that Judge Hovland would go above. I didn't anticipate it going to 10.
Okay. Ryan, you were in the like I said, in the courtroom all day long. Give me your take on the mood of the courtroom and what Judge Hovland said and did.
Well, the mood was somber, I guess. It was a packed courthouse at the beginning, and as the day went along, it was 7 hours. It was 7 hours long testimony and victim impact statements. Judge Hovland questioned Ray before he sentenced him, but the Judge Hovland asked a lot of questions about Ray's travel, about his intent, trying to get an idea of where Ray is at right now physically, how he's been treated while he's in jail, because it did come up as to whether the Bureau of Prisons would be able to care for Ray with his long list of physical ailments. And, as of now, Judge Hovland said that he was never contacted by anyone saying that, Ray was having any problems or any difficulties being in jail. And so that was some of the focus. But then Judge Hovland went on to talk about the travel and the intent of the travel and why Ray Holmberg was saying things that he was saying about things that he did, while Ray was saying that he said that he didn't actually do those things. He was just trying to impress mostly himself. He
braggadocious.
Said braggadocious, and
that word was used a lot.
Puffery, I believe, was another one. And so a lot of Judge Hovland's focus was talking to Ray about why he trying to get a handle on why he did the things that are said, the things that he said, and how he is physically and how he would be cared for in the prison.
In just a second, we're going to be joined by Dane DeKrey. He's a criminal defense lawyer and a partner at Ringstrom DeKrey. He spent a decade in both private and public law, one of the top attorneys in the Fargo-Moorhead area. But first, I want you to hear, I waited outside the courtroom, and Jennifer Poole, the acting U.S. attorney for the state of North Dakota, who tried this case, and I was just so incredibly impressed with when I was listening to her speak to Judge Hovland as she talked about what sentence she felt Ray Holmberg should get. On the way out of the courtroom, I asked her a couple questions.
I think the sentence reflects how serious a crime it was. This was a crime that was an assault on the dignity of many young boys in Prague, and the court considered that factor and considered his long history of manipulating young men here in North Dakota. I think the sentence stands for itself.
Did you think that the sentence was going to be that long?
I think based upon his questioning, it became clear that he was going to vary upward.
Are you happy with your team and how this went?
Oh, yes. I mean, this was a long time getting here. This is a many years of investigation, and I have to handle to those, in particular those two gentlemen over there, Special Agent Cassetta and BCI Special Agent Smith. I mean, they saw this through, conducted hundreds of interviews, ran records down. I mean, I can't impress upon people enough how difficult it is to investigate a crime in another country, and I may talk about that at length at a different date, but very, very difficult. We just can't send investigators over to a foreign country and interview citizens. We have to go through all kinds of hoops. They're protecting their citizens. It's difficult, but we saw it through, and I'm pleased with the result.
Do you think that in light of what the judge said, that makes it harder on the appeal, or are you going to have to deal with an appeal?
I suspect I will have to deal with an appeal because he varied above the guidelines. However, I think Judge Hovland made a very good record, and I look forward to defending that record.
Thank you. In the studio with us is Dane DeKrey, one of the, as I pointed out, top attorneys in the region. He's been in all types of different positions in that courtroom. Dane, talk to me about your take on it.
Yeah, I wasn't there yesterday, and so I've asked around, and I listened to what Tyler has just said. That was a high variance up. And that is not saying whether it's a good or a bad decision personally, but by going that high up, and I think Jen Poole talked about it in her interview, that will allow them to have an appeal. And in normal plea agreements in federal court, if the judge stays within the guideline range, you don't have a right to appeal if you make a plea agreement. But if the judge sentences you outside of the guideline range, you have an automatic right to appeal. And the question for the Eighth Circuit, who's the court above Judge Hovland, will be, did you have a good enough reason to go that much higher than what we normally think is the right sentence for this crime?
During Jennifer Poole's speech or talk or case that she made to the court, Judge Hovland, Tyler, asked her why she went for such a low sentence, which was a big indicator for me.
It was. In fact, that was a question on a lot of people's minds. Given the weight of the sentencing memo, 28 pages long, detailing and graphic nature, through his own words that were written down in Ray Holmberg, the gloating, the boasting of what he was trying to make an argument he didn't actually do, but the judge saw through that. Having all that evidence there, people were right to question why just a 3-year sentence, to detail and such with. But in that process, that agreement did get him to say, I'm guilty. I did this with the expectation that, okay, I'll do the 3 years. But then when that weight of all that evidence of the years of investigation came forward, and yet the judge yesterday, when Jennifer Poole, before she started asking her witness, which was the Department of Homeland Security Special Agent Janke set up. That was a lead on this in conjunction with Jesse Smith, I believe, a special agent of BCI. Judge Hovland said, I've read the memos multiple times. I have read the victim statements multiple times. I have read the evidence multiple times in this. So he had buried himself in everything that had consumed in this case And through that process and through the arguments and the cross-examination, wondering with all this here, how can we only do 3? And, it was well within his right. And we knew this could be a possibility that he says, look, this isn't enough. The general public didn't feel it was enough. I think that's the reason why there was a lot of text in the Afternoons Live seemingly celebrating the 10 years. I'm not Dane DeKrey. I'm not in that legal world. But there seemed to be a lot of chess pieces being moved as to how they can get at least the 3 years, but build that case for the judge to say, you know what, that's not enough. And he decided it wasn't enough.
Yeah. Let me take you around the room. Tyler Axness, host of Afternoons Live. You can hear him right here on the Mighty 790 KFGO is with us. Ryan Janke from the KFGO News team, who's covered this Ray Holmberg case from top to bottom. And Dane DeKrey is here. Check out their work. He's a partner at Ringstrom DeKrey. Dane, I wanted to talk to you about Ray himself, about what he said once it got to the sentencing, and the judge said, do you have anything to add, to say? And for me, I'm not sure that what he did at that time, if I were Mark Freese, his defense attorney, I would have said you should do.
One of the hardest things when you prepare for a sentencing is trying to figure out if there's anything that your client can say that is going to help themselves, or if anything they say may actually hurt themselves. And from everything I read and heard in this case, it seems like Ray didn't do himself any favors during his, we call it a colloquy, but during his speech to the judge. And I've practiced in front of Judge Hovland for many years, and he's a very quiet, stoic, calm man who's very deliberate with his words. And we all know that when Judge Hovland begins to ask your client follow-up questions, it's usually because he's displeased with the way he thinks things are going. And so it didn't surprise me to hear that he questioned him that long. And the problem there, as a lawyer, is at that phase, you can't really step in and say, Your Honor, we're not answering questions, because that's the man who's about to sentence you, or woman, depending on the district. And so you really have to hope that you've prepared enough and that your client is able to understand the questions and understand the theme that you were trying to set forth in sentencing. And it seems like, from what I've read, that Ray didn't do that.
Ryan, your take on that, because you were in the courtroom when Ray was doing this, as was I.
Yeah, there was a lot of things, and to go to the questioning from the judge, one of the questions he asked Ray was, "Are you telling me that there was never any sexual contact with any 14, 15, or 16-year-olds?" Ray said, "To my knowledge, no." And then Judge Hovland said, "So you're telling me you traveled thousands of miles and spent thousands of dollars with the intent to engage in sexual activity with minors, but you never did." And later on, Judge Hovland went on to say, "I can read between the lines." Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of things that Judge Hovland brought up that it seems to me Ray really did to hurt whatever sympathy he might have gotten from the court. Number one, he talked about being braggadocious, about locker room talk, and I talked too much, and when the judge approached him about his writing that he wanted to have sex with a 12-year-old boy, which really means he wanted to rape a 12-year-old boy, he said, that's just one of my little quirks.
Right.
And it was like when he said little quirks, I went, oh boy. And Dane, when you say that Judge Hovland is very stoic, you're right. Because if that would have been Judge Heitkamp up there when he said little quirks, that wouldn't have been a good time for him in the courtroom. And the judge also, I would add this, he really made an argument as to why he spoke for quite a while as to why he was giving the sentence that he was giving. And when I asked around to people like you, it was longer than what was the norm. And I think, Dane, he was really trying to make that point, put it in the record, knowing that there's going to be an appeal. And look, this is why I did this.
Yeah. Obviously, it's for an appeal because you only look at the record on appeal. So the Eighth Circuit will only look at what Judge Hovland said at the hearing. But I also know Judge Hovland. He is a very old school law and order judge. I think this is arguably one of the biggest cases of his career. He's a senior judge now. He knows the ramifications that this has throughout the state, and I think it was really important for him to make clear that the rule of law reaches everywhere. A lot of this case, there was concerns from me, from other people, that are we going to see two justice systems where someone with power gets a much lower sentence than the people that I represented when I was a public defender? And I'm never going to celebrate long prison sentences because that's just not the job that I work and that I do. But I am glad that Judge Hovland recognized that most of the time people get these very long sentences for this behavior, and we are not going to treat Ray Holmberg differently simply because he's Ray Holmberg.
For those individuals who are saying that the sentence actually that Judge Hovland gave was too low, know this: he gave everything he possibly could. That was the high end, right, Dane?
I think if he goes much higher than that, given the guideline range, he would open himself up to an appeal that might actually be overturned, and then we'd be back to square one.
Exactly. Tyler, you and I both served with Ray Holmberg in the legislature. You followed this from day one. Give me your take of what happened here.
Well, I want to dovetail off of something that you guys were just talking about, because as I said at the beginning of that hearing, Judge Hovland said, look, I've gone through these materials over and over. And I got the impression that we don't need to rehash everything in this memo. We don't need to have, the special agents come up. We don't need to have cross-examination. But they did, and they allowed it. And that went 7 hours long. And I think because what Dane was saying, getting this all on record, hearing it all, it's going to be in that appeals process, was Hovland's way of allowing this to breathe. Because not everybody took the time to read that 28-page memo or the 19-page, defense response to it. So I thought the judge handled just yesterday phenomenal. The thing that was described in that courtroom, you mentioned that you and I served, and I know that you've probably gotten the same messages. Well, did you know anything? No. I mean, it was,
I knew he was gay.
There was no secret that Ray Holmberg was a homosexual.
Yeah.
But people cannot conflate that with being a pedophile. Nobody that I knew the latter, that he was going and living that lifestyle, and that he was using his power as a appropriations chair to funnel money into places like Global Bridges to make sure he was on all these legislative junkets that were paid for. And then in the sentencing memo shows that every time he traveled, he was looking for commercial sex. We're paying for the travel. He might have been paying for those activities on his own, but nobody that I know I certainly didn't, and I suspect you didn't know that was the lengths he was going.
Yeah, I knew he never missed a trip. I knew that was, he had that whole kind of Jim Casper, I'll go on every trip I can possibly go on kind of attitude. Joel Heitkamp, your host, Abby Miller, your producer. You go around the room here. You got Tyler Axness. You got Dane DeKrey. Dane's an attorney. You've got Ryan Janke from the KFGO News team. Mark Freese yesterday. After all of this time, Tyler, the respect everyone, including you and I, have for Mark Freese. This had to be one of the hardest things he had to work on.
There's got to be no question. Now, I heard you say something before we went statewide on the News and Views Radio Network about that experience you had in that courtroom, and I had that similar thing. Thankfully, I've never been inside a courtroom, and I hope to never have to go back to a courtroom. But watching Jennifer Poole and Mark Freese represent their respective sides of this case was something to behold. I mean, you have two heavyweight attorneys making their case, one on behalf of the United States government, one defending Ray Holmberg as best as they could, given the client, given the circumstances, which everyone's entitled to. Somebody had texted into Afternoons Live yesterday, wondering if the public was also paying for Ray Holmberg's defense. And I was under the assumption that Ray Holmberg was able to go and afford one of the best defense attorneys around, and Mark Freese through a Vogel law firm. And it turns out, after visiting with attorneys after the fact, there's a process that I was unaware of, not coming from the legal world, that in fact Mark was a public defender for Ray Holmberg, which means I would assume that, we were in fact paying for that. Now, Dane, you're a criminal defense. Notice I said Mark Freese is one of the best criminal defense attorneys in this area. I didn't want to offend there, but walk me through that process, because it was very enlightening for me as to how Mark Freese ended up being the representation and the defense for Ray Holmberg in this situation. Yeah.
One thing I'll say before that is that, Mark and Jen were classmates at UND Law. They've known each other since then, and they are among the giants of the state. And so it is also good to have two of the very best handle a very serious case like this. So the way that you get a public defender in federal court, normally there's an official federal public defender's office. And so if you allegedly commit a crime in federal court, you get one of their 3 lawyers. But sometimes they're conflicted out. For whatever reason, they can't represent that specific defendant. And when that happens, the person still is entitled to a free lawyer. So the question becomes, if not the full-time public defenders, then who? Well, there's a small panel of us who have been appointed by the court who will take these cases by appointment. And so in these certain situations where the normal public defenders can't take the case, there is a group of us who the court then reaches out to, and it's usually random. And they say, hey, do you have time to take this case? We'd love for you to be the temporary public defender for that person. I know this case was handpicked for Mark Freese because I don't think I'm speaking out of school. I appreciate you saying one of the best, but Mark Freese is the dean of the North Dakota Criminal Bar. There's 3 people that, if I were ever in trouble, that I would call and ask to represent me. One of them is Mark Freese. It comes as no surprise that when we figured out that Ray didn't have money to pay for his own defense, that the court specifically reached out and chose Mark and his firm.
Yeah. If I didn't call Mark Freese, Tom Dixon would be right behind it.
That's right.
That's just who they are. And I think it needs to be said. And it isn't just because I consider Mark a friend. He did everything he possibly could.
Yeah.
Everything and the other thing is, everybody looks at all of this and time-wise and everything. You're a public defender. You're not making money. You're not making the type of money you need to support your partnership in the firm. And it's got to take such a toll on you personally, Tyler. I mean, it must.
Especially this high profile, where the public opinion, was certainly in favor of what the United States government's position was, and everybody is entitled to have that representation, that defense. I mean, that's the system we have. But going through this, and then to have a client, and Dane, maybe you can speak to this. There was a pre-sentencing period where Ray Holmberg was going to be allowed to be in his own home, but he could not travel unless it was approved, could not go online unless it was approved. And there was a number of things that he was prohibited from doing, and yet he kept doing it. And that led for a number of people to say, look, he's not trustworthy to be walking among us. We have to have Ray Holmberg in prison. Finally, that day came. I think it was November 1st he had to report. But you're watching as an attorney, your client, not abiding by an agreement he made in which now he's behind bars. And I would say that period of him being in jail allowed Judge Hovland to ask the questions of, how is life like for you, Ray Holmberg, in jail? Because your defense is trying to make the sole argument that you're too old and you're too sick. And when Judge Hovland was asking questions of Ray, he was basically making it seem, hey, prison's not so bad. I'm getting my steps in. I'm sleeping okay. And that argument completely derailed what Mark Freese was trying to build up for his client.
I kept thinking the same thing, Dane. The whole time it was like, if you're Mark Freese and you're trying to get you less time in jail simply based upon your health, Judge Hovland just basically, Ray fell for everything Judge Hovland did.
Right, and that's what Judge Hovland is so good at, is he's playing chess and not checkers, I think, in that moment. I think Ray did 2 things for himself that hurt him based on his behavior before sentencing. Obviously, number one is, had he not misbehaved in the way he did, he would have stayed home, and there would be no questions by Judge Hovland about how jail was, which then would have strengthened their argument that Ray is too frail for jail. By going to jail, it kind of proved that he could do it. The second thing that I think is equally important is, one of the main factors a judge considers is, what are you going to do when this is all over? When you are no longer in trouble and we're no longer watching you, what kind of person are you going to be? And Ray showed that he couldn't even stay on the straight and narrow in the time before he was sentenced.
Yeah.
That's the most serious time where you have to be on your best behavior. And I think for Judge Hovland, that was probably a factor in, look, this guy's never going to learn.
Yep.
And that's not Mark's fault. That's not anybody's fault. Ray made those choices, and that's the hardest thing about a defense lawyer. Mark probably worked for countless months to piece together the best possible deal he could do, and you just watched it slowly unravel on him before sentencing.
Because of what Ray did. Yesterday, Ryan, victims got up and spoke.
Yes.
One individual talking about his time as a young drug addict in Ray Holmberg in a position as a counselor at Grand Forks Central and having access to him. Speak to that.
Yeah, he got into trouble, got into drugs, had all kinds of issues in Grand Forks. So his family moved to Washington, and he sort of fell back into these same patterns. And he had that relationship with Ray Holmberg, and so he reached out to Ray, said, "Hey, I need some money," and Ray sent him money. And then he had trouble again, so he asked Ray for money again, and this was, to support his drug habit. And that was when Ray told him, there's other ways that you can earn money rather than me just send you the money. And that was when sort of the sexual contact and that sort of thing began.
Yeah.
And this
he sent him a recorder and $200 every time he sent him a video.
Right. Yep.
I don't think I'm going too far in saying some of these things. They need to be said so that you understand the seriousness. Mm-hmm. And it just led to a terrible life for this young man.
Right. And at one point, I believe Ray went there to record it himself. And the victim said when he had to watch this back, and he said something to the effect of, "I was looking at my younger self in the eyes, watching the pain of that."
Yeah,
and just
dealing with ways to get money for his addiction.
Right.
I was going through some of my notes here, and one of the things that upset me, Tyler, was Ray was using words like bisexual. He wasn't using words like rapist, obviously, because you and I both know it has nothing to do with being gay.
No.
But the one thing that Ray consistently pushed on was that the state of North Dakota never would understand someone like him, which is why he had to travel. It really ticked me off. I mean, that really got me mad. Number one, he can be gay in North Dakota. Everyone knew he was gay. I'm going to leave that away from the whole predator, he says that. The people of Grand Forks elected him from the 70s until now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're right to separate his lifestyle when it comes to being a homosexual, because you can look right across the river and see that there's a Republican state senator in Eichhorn that was pursuing underage girls. This is not, of that nature. But the attitude of Ray saying, "Oh, I kept this to myself because it was unacceptable," is an excuse that carries no weight to pursue what he was doing. But I would also encourage people to go look at Ray Holmberg's voting record when there were opportunities to make it more acceptable, in his opinion, to be a homosexual in North Dakota. There was ample opportunities to provide equal rights when it comes to housing, when it comes to employment, when it comes to all these things. And Ray repeatedly voted no on those. So he did himself no favors in trying to provide that acceptance, so to speak, from a state legislative seat, and a very powerful seat that he had. So if he's going to make this excuse that, this was all just a reaction because I wasn't going to be accepted, it's just a bunch of BS. As you said, it was no secret for people. And then when you have those opportunities that came up frequently, he did nothing in that position that he had.
He talks now about going to counseling, but he made very, very light of it, Ryan. Did he not?
He did. And to go back to what you said, Tyler, in fact, Jennifer Poole said that Ray's homosexuality was probably the worst kept secret in the state. So it's, you know.
And you're right, Tyler. He voted against all legislation for LGBTQ individuals. Do not confuse being gay with who Ray Holmberg is. Don't confuse those two. That's the key. Number of things that need to be brought up yet. Number one, individual sent in a text, another top attorney. I want to get this to Dane DeKrey. This individual says, other people clearly knew things and did nothing. Maybe Dane can explain how those people are now anonymous and essentially protected by their cooperation. Your thoughts on that, Dane?
Well, if the people cooperated, then they have some sort of an agreement that will guarantee them some sort of security. It's all confidential.
Well,
so
we know their name.
That mechanism will probably not happen outside of a Freedom of Information Act when the case is done. But the other option that sometimes happens is if a person is found guilty or they plead guilty and they haven't ever cooperated in the case, they can go to prison and they can reach out to their lawyer and say, all right, I don't like it here. The sentence is too long. How do I get a lower sentence? And there's a way to cooperate after you've pled guilty. And if the cooperation is believed, then they will ship you back to your home district and they'll re-sentence you, taking into consideration your cooperation. So as long as Ray didn't cooperate. So if you're one of these
individuals, and Ryan, there were individuals that were brought up in court that their names weren't allowed to be spoken.
Yeah, there were a lot of things talked about. Of course, cooperating witnesses 1 and 2 were 2 of them. I'm not sure the other ones. There was a lot of acronyms used, and so you kind of get lost there on which ones were the ones that were looked at. In that regard. So I'm not exactly sure which 2 the other 2 were, but there were 4 other people.
That was actually one of the arguments yesterday when I was taking my notes. I put in my sheet here that I was nodding my head up and down with what Mark was saying, which was, look, there are other people's. Why haven't they been charged? And I think acting U.S. Attorney Jennifer Poole is going to have to speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, she gave the interview to you. I hope if and when she does sit down, there is an explanation, because that is the last vestige of, I guess, 2 systems of justice, or there needs to be an explanation for why did we choose to charge Ray Holmberg but not these other individuals? What is the reason why they're not being unmasked at some point? I understand while the case is going, but the calculation changes now. But I do think to tie this thing up, to give the public the justification they deserve, there probably needs to be a fulsome explanation.
And North Dakota's Bureau of Criminal Investigation played a role in all this.
They did. Special Agent Smith was one that I think accompanied the Department of Homeland Security over to Prague, overseas, around the country, doing this investigation. And Ryan, you're right. And so same with you, Joel. Mark Freese in the defense saying, this is all coming back on to Ray. We know that there were 5 people that went to Prague with Ray. There's cooperating witness number 1, I believe cooperating witness number 2. Who are the other 3? And why has nothing been investigated or revealed about them? Why is it that there were longtime friends that were talked about in a sentencing memo that nothing was done about or with? And people are right to say these people knew what Ray was up to, and they sat and actually aided and abetting and him to have an opportunity to continue to do this going forward. And I hope that at some point that does come out, because this wasn't just Ray. There was a network that was cooperating with Ray, or certainly shielding Ray from this ever coming public.
Ryan, the one thing that was mentioned time and time again was who Ray was sending those messages to that said, there's no too young here, basically was the message, and who was traveling with him to Prague. Did that all come out in the courtroom yesterday?
The names of those people? No.
That's the point. To me, that's the point. Somebody was traveling with him to Prague. Mm-hmm. Somebody was communicating with him, and they knew what he was doing because he was telling them. And that the public deserves to know.
And I think the question will be, is it going to come from the U.S. Attorney's Office, or is it going to come from Ray Holmberg later on?
Or the Attorney General's Office.
Correct.
BCI was part of the investigation. Let me set the table for you again. Dane DeKrey is here, one of the top attorneys in Fargo. We've got, I would argue the whole region. We've got Ryan Janke here from the KFGO News team, the host of Afternoons Live, and somebody who's covered this from top to bottom, Tyler Axness, as well here. We're talking about the Holmberg trial, the Holmberg sentencing yesterday. There's names that, quite frankly, were part of all of this, and a lot of it came about and did. If you go to KFGO.com, you're going to hear a thing, if you go to a podcast, called Capital Punishment. And there it gets broken down. And names like Liz Brocker, Wayne Stenjum, Nicholas DeRozier, Jason Doctor, Troy Seibel. These are names that are all involved in this case, period. Plain and simple. There's people that I have said time and time again should be subject to, or at least talk about, because I think they knew Ray Holmberg well enough that a guy could ask him a question or not, or two. You've got people like Jim Poolman. You've got people like, trust me, there's others that we could have a chance to talk to that were part of Ray's inner circle. A lot of people are saying, look, find out who went to Prague with him. Ryan, it's not that easy.
It's really not that easy. And
I mean, you could ask a Bruce Jovic,
right?
You could, but you don't know,
right? You don't know, and these sort of things, and Dane would be able to speak to this better than I can, but. We ask for things and things are sealed, and we just don't have access to them, and then it becomes a matter of asking people, and if they deny things or say they're not talking, it's hard to make them.
Dane, how do you go about if you're the media, if you're the public? How do you go about finding out these individuals that might have known that he was a pedophile and might have enabled him being a pedophile, and yet are being hidden through the trial?
Well, I think that it's always going to be difficult just to simply ask someone. Anyone who's in the orbit of Ray Holmberg most likely doesn't want to talk and is not going to as a private citizen. I think the only refuge here is public records litigation. And that's predicated on the idea that these records were written down when they were supposed to be. Sometimes when people are doing criminal conduct, their records keeping isn't quite as good as it normally is, that it's still there, and that through this litigation there's a path forward. States have varying and different degrees of privacy laws and public records requests. And when I was with the ACLU, I got the same question all the time. Well, just get the records, do a public records request, do a FOIA request. It's kind of like our version of it's HIPAA. Everyone knows the word FOIA, but it's actually very, very complicated and very tricky. And if a other party doesn't want it out, they can drag it on for a long time. So there's a there, but it's a hidden gem.
Ryan, this text message is directed at you and the news team. It said, will you be posting any documents from yesterday's court hearing? You guys are doing a great job of explaining this, but I think this individual wants to read it.
Sure. There was, I looked before I came in here. There are some things that are in the docket, but some of them are sealed. The things that are not sealed, I can certainly post them online, basically talking about the order that was given. Nothing really beyond that. It talks about the sentence, the 10-year sentence, and then the supervised release and what that means. That can certainly be posted online.
There were individuals in that courtroom yesterday that spoke to their abuse by Ray and what he did to their life. We made reference to them earlier, but there was a lot of media in that room, myself included. But I oftentimes point out, I'm not the journalist. I'm a talk show host. I'm a commentator. You are a journalist. That's what you do. The Fargo Forum has covered this incredibly well throughout the whole process as well. Those victims turned and asked you, people from the Monitor, Amy was there, Dalrymple as well. They asked you not to use any names.
Correct. There were two who spoke. One did give a name and asked that we not use that name. The other person who went up there did not even give his name as part of the court record. They did not give names.
Tyler, do you think we'd have been this far in terms of the general public knowing the names, for example, I just mentioned, and how this all shook out if we hadn't done what we did as media?
No, I don't. What I want to do is differentiate. When we're talking about wanting to get the names of those that were involved, we all are acknowledging that the victims' names are now what we're asking for. That there's a line because there's cooperating witnesses One, that doesn't appear to be a victim inside of the sentencing memo. The cooperating witness number 2 seemed to have been a victim, and cooperating witness number 3, a victim again. What we're looking for is who was on the receiving end of Ray Holmberg's communications. We know that text messages and emails, there's a sender and there are receivers. And they have, in his words, written form of what he was bragging about. And the public's wanted to know, rightfully so, who was receiving that and not doing anything with it. Now, as far as this getting to the height where it is, I mean, obviously this investigation went a long ways. But in trying to make sure that the public understood the weight of not only Ray Holmberg, but in conjunction with what was going on in the Attorney General's office, the connection between Ray Holmberg and the Attorney General's office, and Ray's ability to get what he wants through the legislature as an appropriator, I don't know that without media doing its job to really shine the light on all these what could appear to be separate pieces and say, no, this is one big story here, that we wouldn't have gotten as much attention that's deserved of this had we not been covering it.
Ryan, people are asking, and there's a number of these, very legitimate question, whether or not this needs to be narrowed down through the airline records.
Yeah, I don't... I suppose there's a way to get that. I don't know what that is exactly.
We know the dates that he went to Prague.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And so Dane, good suggestion.
Yeah, that's, again, predicated on them holding him that long. I have a case right now where we're trying to find bank records from 6 years ago, and the bank is telling us that they're not keeping those records, which seems crazy because you have to keep records for 10 years in certain circumstances for financial crimes, or Verizon only keeps your location data for 1 to 2 years unless you make a claim in advance. And so I just want to caution everybody that there's investigators and there's very smart people who will be able to say, oh, this is a possible little footprint. This is a possible little nugget. And you can run it down, and that's what journalism is, and you'll find one maybe, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's still there, because there are record retention rules that companies have that after a certain period of time, it doesn't mean it's nefarious. It means they're just clearing out their shelves. Yeah. And so that could be a victim of that too, depending on how old it is.
Dane, this comes in, you spoke to it earlier, but I want you to answer this text message question. It says, are we willing to give him a shorter sentence if he gives those names out?
Well, I would imagine that the U.S. Attorney's Office would want to hear anybody who is violating the law, because if they didn't want to hear that, they would be hypocritical because they wanted to know about Ray Holmberg. So my guess is that at any point, if Ray were willing to tell the names that we are all looking for, the feds would listen and they would give him a reduced sentence.
How long before this? Oh, I'm sorry, Tyler.
Let me do a follow-up here, because I've been saying these people have been aiding and abetting. They've been knowing that Ray's been doing this. So you can't convince me that they haven't. Is that illegal? If they knew he was out violating, international sex trafficking crimes, they knew he was doing this, they had the information, he was boasting about it, and then they didn't
communicating it with him.
Yeah, they didn't report that. Is that illegal?
I think it's definitely chargeable. I would imagine you'd hear similar puffery and braggadocious defenses that, oh, that's just Ray being Ray. Yeah, I was on that text thread, but I never really thought Ray was doing that. But I think it's colorable to make the charge, but there would be a defense to it.
Well, not all the emails have been collected between Ray, Wayne Stenjum, the involvement. You found some things out in that trial about Drozier and Wayne Stenjum.
Yeah, in the morning, you have Dan Cassetta, who's the special agent that was with the Department of Homeland Security. The prosecution's asking him questions, and what was revealed after the search warrant was executed, they collected Ray Holmberg's devices from his home. He asked one question when they were leaving, and he asked these special agents, "Can I get Wayne Stenjum's phone number from my phone?" And he made it known through the testimony that Ray wasn't asking it in a way to be like, well, do you know who I am, my powerful friends? It was he wanted Wayne's number. Well, they gave it to him. They're taking all of his devices. What's he going to do with it? Well, through Cassetta's testimony, Ray called Wayne's cell phone from a burner phone, left him a voicemail saying, I'm in trouble, don't tell anybody. I don't know that call ever went returned. And time, I don't know, pressure, Ray calls Wayne Stenjum's office in the Attorney General's office, in which you have a Nicole, an assistant answer, tells Ray that Wayne is not available. And Ray directs her to go whisper in Wayne's ear that Nick the Thief did it again. In that case, I'm thinking, well, it's got to be Nicholas DeRozier. And what we find out in the cross-examination when the defense is trying to make the case that Nicholas DeRozier, whom is in federal prison for trafficking people from the cities to Grand Forks, and that 3 of his employees were doing commercial sex with Ray Holmberg, that allegedly they had stolen cash from Ray Holmberg's safe, a thief. So there seems to be the fact that Ray Holmberg could use a coded name like Nick the Thief did it again. Go whisper that in the Attorney General's ear. That there was more to what others may have known about this, and we'll never know because Liz Brocker and Troy Seibel deleted all those communications.
He wouldn't have said Nick the Thief if he didn't have a way of communicating something with Wayne that Wayne knew.
I know.
Wayne knew.
I
can't speak for Wayne, but maybe that would have come about in those emails. But I mean, when he's saying Nick the Thief did it again to Wayne, why would you convey that message?
Well, it implies 2 things. It implies that they know who this Nick is because they have a nickname, and it implies that it happened once before because it did it again. So it's definitely not something you would say if you didn't think the person would be able to understand what you were saying.
Okay. I'm going to let you go, Dane. You got to go make a living. Do not bill me for the time you've been here. Ryan, I'm going to let you go as well. Do you have anything else to add?
No, I don't. If you have anything else you need me for, bring me in.
Trust me, we'll send a note. Tyler, I want to hang on to you because I want to talk about the reaction from the state of North Dakota perspective of all of this. Message comes in to me asking why I keep using names like Jim Pullman and Bruce Jovig in regards to the whole Ray Holmberg case. Here's my point to all of this. Everyone keeps talking about who knew things. Okay, I'm not saying these individuals are guilty. That isn't my point. I'm saying that they were part of a very tight-knit group with Ray Holmberg. Wayne Stenjum, Jim Pullman, Bruce Jovig, Ray Holmberg. These guys have a lot of things that they discuss, they have in common, not the least of which Grand Forks. And so as a legislature, Tyler, you served, I served, they've got some things to answer to here as well.
Well, they should at the very least be going back and looking at all these travel records of Ray Holmberg. I know that we have that finite number of dollars spent, well over $100,000. In fact, he was the biggest recipient of state tax dollars to go travel the world and do it in the name of the state of North Dakota. Mm-hmm. They've got to revisit.
Representing North Dakota.
And you know how the process of how you get selected to go on those junkets, Joel, where you've got the leaders and you've got the appropriators. And there's a handful of people that get to select who goes where. Well, Ray was one of those that was being the decider of who's going where. And he was deciding, I'm going everywhere.
Well, so the Martinsons, you had Ray in the House, or in the Senate, I mean. You had Bob Martinson, one of the most powerful legislators, appropriations in the House. Bob sending money in conjunction with Ray to his brother, who heads up not a state agency, the North Dakota School Board Association, so that they can all, in fairness to Bob, he didn't travel, but he made sure the money was there so that his brother and Ray could travel.
Yeah. Well, and as we've said before on News and Views and on Afternoons Live on the eastern side of the News and Views radio network, anybody listening right now that gets to take a business trip, that you get to take an educational trip, what's expected when you come back?
A report.
What'd you learn?
Yeah.
What did you learn that's going to benefit this company, this education program, the state of North Dakota? And oftentimes, those are not required in this. It's go have fun. Go sit in the meetings, but we're not going to keep tabs on whether or not you actually attend the conference. You could be out, touring around. You'd be going to this man's villa, whatever it might be, and there's no reporting.
Where the beds, he said, are worse than the Cass County Jail.
He said that.
Yeah.
When he was talking to Judge Hovland, he said that the jails in bed are more comfortable than in Prague.
That the jail bed is more comfortable than his bed at Prague at Man's Villa. And you're Mark Freese sitting next to him. You just want to rip your hair out. Yeah. I mean, it's like, are you kidding me? There's
Joel, the bottom line with Ray Holmberg, there's been no remorse.
No.
There has been no remorse of what he got caught doing for decades. And Judge Hovland had to have taken that into account.
When we come back, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what North Dakota should do, and we're going to talk about what we think they will do from two former state senators, some people that served in those seats. And so there's no question that Ray Holmberg got to do what he wanted to do. The question is who allowed him to, because he didn't just get the checkbook. I mean, granted, he had the power, but there were other people that were players in this as well. Somebody texting in and saying, wait, he said in the courtroom that the beds in jail are more comfortable than in Prague. Lose the key and take the jail bed away. There was that type of idiocy in terms of, I don't know how to describe it. I just felt really bad for Mark Freese.
And with Dane DeKrey in here earlier, there's only so much you can do for a client. Mm-hmm. And what we learned was that, in essence, Mark Freese was assigned this case. And being the outstanding representation he is, he took it and did the best that he could. But when you've got a client, in this case of Ray Holmberg, having no remorse, cracking jokes, saying, it's just a quirk that I have, that I send text messages joking about sleeping with underage boys, talking about photos. And when you have one lobbyist saying, can you send me the R and X rated photos instead of the G photos? There's nothing funny about this. Mm-hmm. And he did nothing as he himself, as the defendant in Ray Holmberg, to help his own case of why he should have that smaller sentence than what went above and beyond those 10 years. I feel bad for Mark Freese in this situation because he did the best he could, which everybody would expect in that case. But what we were talking about earlier, Joel, is, this was something that was not just 14 trips to Prague. Now, that's the thing that, he got charged and admitted that, yes, I was going there with the intent to have sex with a minor. But the case that was built up in that sentencing memo and that was laid bare in that courtroom yesterday was that there was a pattern of this, and it was a pattern of corruption. The pattern of, I am a state lawmaker, I have power, I am the appropriations chair, I will hold on to that power unless I get caught in a hotel room with a 17-year-old boy.
Yeah.
He talked about going to these legislative conferences and what he was receiving from other people because of the power he had. And that his predecessor in that same position didn't utilize the power the same way he is, and that basically he was foolish because the guy before him didn't do what he's able to do.
Yeah.
There was the mentality, the malicious way of saying, do you know who I am? And then using that through our tax dollars, through the votes in Grand Forks, to go out there and abuse his office and in turn abuse underage men. So what do you do to change it? The legislature, the leaders put out a statement yesterday immediately. We had you call in 10 years. I went to my email and I get this joint statement from the House and Senate majority and minority leaders and their assistants saying how awful this is, that we're going to review these processes. Well, they damn well better get after it right now because this session's about to wrap up. And you've got a state auditor's office that can go through all these records. Meanwhile, this legislature keeps attacking the auditor's office. You got an ethics commission that can house these complaints from lobbyists, from staffers, from anybody else that's been abused by someone like Ray Holmberg. This same legislature keeps attacking the ethics commission when they try to ask for more to do what the public created them to do. So the legislature needs to clean their act up in making sure that
that is one of the best points someone can make about this legislature. They take on the auditor's office because they don't want to get audited. They take on the ethics commission because they don't want to have to live up to the ethics that are set, the standards that are set. Great point, Tyler. Great point.
So instead of putting out a joint statement, put it into action. I mean,
do you think they will?
I have very little faith.
They won't. They won't. Do you really believe that the Koppelmans and the Caspers and keep going down the list of names are going to stop themselves from being able to take these trips, these junkets, these Antigua, this whole, hey, we should have gaming in North Dakota? They're not going to lose that.
No, they've proven time and time again. And to
Or they're not going to be held accountable for it.
Correct. And to further this point, I can't help but go back to 2020 and the 2021 session. COVID is shutting things down. Businesses are pulling back in. Those conferences that were being canceled because, well, this pandemic's going on, everybody was expected to find some savings, not only in your private life, in your business, and in state governments. And they were telling every agency, you got to cut back, you got to cut back. When it came time for the legislative body to cut back on their travel and what they were appropriating so that people like Ray Holmberg could travel wherever they want, they refused to cut back on the travel. Mm-hmm. They refused to cut back on their benefits. I don't trust that Ray Holmberg being sentenced to 10 years for what he was doing while in office is going to change their attitude on that.
You know, leadership might do what they're saying they're going to do. I don't doubt that. Good people are in leadership. I just don't believe that the people that surround them, and here's the partisan moment. You ready? I have no doubt the Democrats will vote in unison on this to make this tougher, to stick up for the Ethics Commission and the Auditor's Office. I have also no doubt that the majority of the Republicans won't. And I posted on Facebook today, and everybody saw it as a partisan post. It's a factual post, which is, the question was, do you expect the Republican majority in North Dakota to deal with this? Because I got a text message here saying the sad part about where North Dakota is and where these people's mindset is that if Ray Holmberg was up for election again, had an R behind his name, he'd probably win that election.
It's a sad reality.
Another text message does come in that goes back in time on this, and that text message says quite clearly that, look, let's pay attention to the fact that Jim Pullman was questioned without this, that he was in a meeting, was pulled out by investigators, and there were several witnesses to that. So an individual texting that in. Somebody saying, do you guys ever get threatened with lawsuits? I'm sure you talking about this on the radio pisses off some powerful North Dakota Republicans. Have you been threatened by a lawsuit? Because yes, is the answer for me.
Yeah, and the one thing on the flip side of that, I'm shocked at how many that are involved in some of these circles want us to keep digging. This is an uncomfortable situation for anybody to be in. To have to talk about an individual that abused his power to go and rape kids. To find out that he has a close circle that he was confidently trusting them to explain this to. And while we're trying to pursue who those individuals were so justice can be brought there, it's an uncomfortable thing probably for them to be hearing.
Yeah. So let's go back in time a little bit, ladies and gentlemen, because a lot of this in regards to Wayne Stenjum's emails, which we know now, you talked about the burner phone between Ray and Wayne. We know that with DeRozier, Ray took him out to meet Wayne Stenjum. When it came to those emails, and I just want to point this out through our criminal system. The beginning of the request for those emails began right here with you and I and the great people that are listening to our shows, because the Ethics Commission and others were questioned over whether or not Jason, doctor, actually was doing something illegal or certainly unethical with Wayne Stenjum. He was already gone by then. Wayne was dead. No autopsy done. I want to point that out again. And so the Ethics Commission was doing its job based on complaints filed with the Ethics Commission. And then the next thing you know, we can't get the emails or can't get all of the emails because Troy Seibel, who is dead now too, Troy Seibel, the Deputy Attorney General, and Liz Brocker went in on a weekend right after Wayne's death, and Liz Brocker said, we have to delete all those emails. And she is working in a public office yet. She's working for Julie Lawyer, got a job from there after Drew Wrigley basically told her, you got to leave. She ends up landing a public office with a prosecutor, with Julie Lawyer, the state's attorney from Burleigh County.
Let's not forget why she said we have to delete those emails, because Wayne kept everything. Everything. And now everything that is a public record was gone, or at least to a large extent. I know that by fate and luck, apparently, we're able to retrieve some of those because an update didn't happen on one of those phones. And the Bureau of Criminal Investigation under Drew Wrigley was able to access that through some updates in software. But ultimately, the vast majority of those communications that are state records, public owns them, are gone. And when you hear from a Department of Homeland Security special agent yesterday that Ray used a burner phone to call his friend in the Attorney General's office and tell him, whisper in his ear, that Nick the Thief did it again. As you just heard from a criminal defense attorney, it sets up a couple of questions.
Wayne knows about Nick.
Nick DeRozier was brought up at length yesterday. I mean, Nicholas DeRozier is in federal prison for decades because he was trafficking people from Minneapolis to Grand Forks.
To Ray Holmberg.
He
was one of his clients.
3 of Nicholas DeRozier's employees had commercial sex with Ray Holmberg. And we can't forget in this process that you mentioned that Troy Seibel's gone, Wayne Stengel's gone, Bob Coons is also gone. Bob Coons was a business partner with Nicholas DeRozier, who got ran over not once but twice by a skid steer while they were removing snow in the early morning hours at Ray Holmberg's house.
And can I just say this to those of us who know how to operate a Bobcat? He knew he ran over a man, and then he ran over him again.
And waited and waited and waited before they called the ambulance.
Yes, exactly.
Dubbed an accident.
Tyler, thanks for coming in, man. Appreciate it.